Most people wake up tired not because they slept too little, but because their brain never truly went offline. That's the uncomfortable truth. You can spend 8 hours in bed and still wake up feeling like your mind ran a marathon overnight. And here's the part no one tells you: the brain does not reward longer sleep. It rewards better timed sleep. In clinical psychology, fatigue is rarely a sign of laziness or lack of discipline. It is a signal of biological misalignment. Consider this: 2 people sleep for 6 hours. One wakes up clear-headed, emotionally steady, and alert. The other wakes up heavy, irritable, and mentally slow. The difference isn't genetics or motivation, it's what happened inside the brain during those hours. Sleep is not a passive shutdown. It's an active neurological process with precise stages, chemical shifts, and timing rules. When those rules are followed, the brain recovers faster than most people imagine. When they're violated, even long sleep becomes ineffective. The modern world quietly sabotages this process. Artificial light delays melatonin. Endless stimulation keeps dopamine elevated. Irregular schedules confuse the circadian clock. The result is not insomnia, but shallow sleep. And shallow sleep is the kind that steals clarity, focus, and emotional balance the next day. People try to fix it by sleeping more, napping longer, or relying on caffeine, never realizing they are treating the symptom while reinforcing the cause. What if the real skill is not learning how to sleep longer, but learning how to let the brain enter deep sleep sooner? What if waking up fresh has less to do with hours and more to do with how quickly your nervous system feels safe enough to shut down? In psychiatry, this is where the conversation changes. Because once sleep becomes efficient, the body needs less of it to restore itself. Tonight, the brain will follow rules whether you know them or not. The question is whether those rules will work for you, or against you. This is not about sleep deprivation, and it is important to say that clearly before the mind jumps to conclusions. Deprivation implies force, pushing the brain beyond its limits, borrowing energy from tomorrow, and paying for it later with emotional instability, poor concentration, and long-term health consequences. What we are discussing is the opposite of that. This is about respecting how the brain is designed to recover and removing the habits that interfere with that process. When sleep is aligned with biology, the brain often needs fewer hours not because it is being denied rest, but because it is receiving it more efficiently. The brain does not measure rest in minutes, it measures it in depth and sequence. Deep sleep and REM sleep are the stages that restore neural balance, regulate emotion, consolidate memory, and reset stress circuits. When sleep timing is irregular or overstimulated, these stages are delayed or fragmented. People remain unconscious for long periods, yet their brain never reaches the depth required for true recovery. In this state, adding more hours simply extends light, unproductive sleep. Efficiency remains low, and fatigue persists. Sleep deprivation forces wakefulness despite unmet biological needs. Sleep optimization does the opposite, it creates conditions where the brain completes its most restorative work earlier in the night. This is why individuals who stabilize their sleep schedule, reduce late-night stimulation, and anchor their circadian rhythm with morning light often notice a spontaneous reduction in sleep duration without loss of energy. They are not cutting sleep short, their brain is finishing its work on time. Another critical difference lies in the nervous system's sense of safety. A stressed, hypervigilant brain resists deep sleep. It stays partially alert, scanning for threat, even while the body rests. Deprivation ignores this and demands performance anyway. Optimization lowers the brain's perceived risk by reducing cognitive load, emotional carryover, and physiological arousal before bedtime. When the brain feels safe, it lets go faster. This approach also respects individual variability. Some brains require more sleep, others less, and forcing a universal number leads many people to oversleep or undersleep unnecessarily. The goal is not to chase fewer hours as an achievement, but to wake up without heaviness, mental fog, or emotional drag. When that happens with fewer hours, it is a sign of alignment, not sacrifice. So this is not about glorifying exhaustion or shrinking sleep for productivity. It is about allowing the brain to do what it evolved to do, restore itself efficiently when conditions are right. Freshness comes from regulation, not willpower, and this distinction changes how fatigue is understood at a psychological level. Willpower is a conscious effort applied by the prefrontal cortex, the same system responsible for decision-making, self-control, and focus. But alertness, energy, and the feeling of being awake are not generated there. They arise from deeper regulatory systems in the brainstem, hypothalamus, and limbic circuitry that operate largely outside conscious control. Trying to force wakefulness through motivation, discipline, or caffeine is like pressing harder on the gas pedal while the engine timing is misaligned. You may move forward, but the system degrades. The brain maintains freshness through balance between opposing forces, arousal and inhibition, cortisol and melatonin, dopamine and adenosine, sympathetic activation and parasympathetic recovery. When these systems are synchronized, wakefulness feels effortless. Attention stabilizes. Mood becomes even. The body rises in the morning without internal resistance. When they are dysregulated, no amount of willpower can produce genuine alertness, only temporary stimulation followed by deeper exhaustion. This is why people often feel most tired not after short nights, but after irregular ones. A late bedtime, even with sufficient hours, disrupts hormonal sequencing. Cortisol may spike too early or too late. Melatonin may linger into the morning. The brain wakes up biologically confused. In that state, forcing productivity creates internal friction. The person feels awake in theory but heavy in practice, as if moving through resistance. Regulation begins with predictability. When sleep and wake times are consistent, the brain anticipates transitions. Neurotransmitters rise and fall smoothly instead of abruptly. Freshness becomes a default state rather than something to be summoned. This is also why chronic reliance on alarms creates grogginess. Sudden awakening interrupts sleep cycles and elevates stress hormones before the brain has completed its transition into wakefulness. Emotional regulation plays an equally important role. Unresolved stress keeps the nervous system partially activated overnight. Even during sleep, the brain remains on guard. The result is fragmented recovery and a sense of waking already depleted. Willpower cannot override this because the body is responding to perceived threat, not conscious intention. Reducing mental load before sleep, by closing cognitive loops and minimizing stimulation, restores the conditions under which freshness can emerge naturally. Ultimately, the feeling of being refreshed is a physiological signal that the brain has completed its overnight regulatory tasks. When those systems are respected, alertness appears quietly, without effort. When they are ignored, no amount of discipline can compensate. Freshness, then, is not something you generate. It is something you allow by aligning the brain's regulatory rhythms instead of fighting them. The real mistake people make is believing that feeling tired is a personal failure, a lack of discipline, motivation, or strength. It isn't. Fatigue is feedback. It is the brain communicating that its regulatory systems are misaligned, not that you are weak. When sleep is treated as something to conquer, controlled by willpower or shortcuts, the nervous system resists. But when sleep is treated as a biological process to be supported, the resistance disappears. Waking up fresh is not a reward for effort, it is the result of alignment. When timing is consistent, stimulation is controlled, light is respected, and the mind is allowed to stand down, the brain completes its restorative work efficiently. In that state, longer sleep is no longer necessary, and shorter sleep is no longer harmful. The body rises naturally because it is ready, not because it is forced. This is the shift that matters. Stop asking how little you can sleep, and start asking how deeply your brain can recover. When recovery is complete, freshness follows automatically. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but quietly, without alarms, without struggle, without the heaviness people have come to accept as normal. And once you experience that kind of wakefulness, it becomes clear, the goal was never fewer hours. The goal was a regulated brain.